I'm Steve Siemens, and here are my memories and appreciation of my oldest brother, Phil. I'm 12 years younger than Phil, and 6 years younger than my youngest brother, Mark. I grew up in the Villa Street house on my father's plant nursery. My early memories are of 4 brothers playing and working in the vicinity, but I was unable to play with them. Around me were the leftovers of other childhoods that were mysterious. Lincoln logs, Tinker toys, and partially broken pull toys. There'd been a lot of play I had missed. I looked forward to growing big enough to play with my brothers. In a 1973 letter, Phil reminisced about growing up at the Villa Street nursery, which had farms on 3 sides and a creek running through it. Jack and Dorothea had sent him photos because the nursery was closing. Thank you for the beautiful pictures of the house on Villa Street. They bring back memories of the early years. This is one of the earliest pictures of the house. Playing in the yard. This backyard play was before my time. Swimming in the creek. Picking fruit. And the beautiful trees and flowers. I often think how especially fortunate I was to grow up among all the natural beauty, especially when I see city children and pity them that they have to go to a park to get any kind of contact with nature. The pictures are lovely, and I will treasure them. Thank you. Phil was good at photography, and he bought a good camera and photographed family portraits before I was born. He was absent from the photographs because he took them. I asked Phil about these photos days before he died. Why were there so many relatives at our house all dressed in their formal attire? Because I had a camera. Because of my hopes of playing with my brothers, I was disappointed when Phil moved out to go to college. I was 6 years old. Phil's graduation from Wheaton Academy was mentioned several times in the local paper. The paper reported that Phil received 3 awards at his graduation, including a full scholarship to MIT. I remember my father saying, if anyone wanted to go to college, they should get a scholarship. He couldn't afford to send anyone. As I started first grade, I was convinced if Phil could do it, I could too. I could tell that my parents were pleased with Phil. I do not remember much interaction with Phil while he lived at Villa Street, but as keeper of the family archive, I found photographic evidence that Phil held me when we visited the Brookfield Zoo. He seems to be pointing out something to me. I probably could not make it out, since I was very nearsighted and only got glasses at age 8. By the time I was 12, all my brothers had left the nursery, and I had inherited their chores. Phil was clearly a gifted musician. Phil was the organist at the church in my early memories. I was fascinated to find his old piano instruction book in the piano bench. I knew it could teach me to read music if only I could read English. When Phil realized I was trying to learn, he showed me first lessons in Bach and Bach's 2- and 3-part inventions. I still associate Bach with Phil. And even now, the piano in my house was initially rented by Phil and the rest of my brothers to encourage my playing. At age 8, just before getting glasses, I had my first long car trip. It was to visit Phil at MIT. Going to college seemed all the more important. Phil entered graduate school in 1965, aiming for a PhD in physics. Phil studied under Hans Bethe, who won the Nobel Prize while Phil was his student. Many universities sought to recruit Phil, and he chose the University of Copenhagen. Dan and Jim visited him there in the early 1970s. When I was 14, Jim lived in Oregon and encouraged me to go to college there. I asked my counselor about Oregon colleges. He told me that his daughter was at Reed College in Portland. I wanted to check it out. Phil enabled me to visit Oregon by buying a car in Elgin, which he planned to use in Berkeley, where he had a temporary appointment. Phil's Danish roommate, Ken, and I drove it from Elgin to Portland when I was 16. I had a learner's permit, and Ken had an international driver's license. In Oregon, I visited and liked Reed College, and then visited Jim. Phil joined us, and we drove to Berkeley in 1972. Phil encouraged my education, advising me on my high school senior courses. I qualified for a modest scholarship to U of Illinois, but I was set on going to Oregon, and Reed College. In 1973, student loans had very good terms and inflation was raging. Phil advised me to borrow the maximum amount, and he offered to co-sign. I would never have borrowed so much without his advice. It was great advice, and I did not begin to repay until 1991, with no accumulated interest and with far less valuable dollars. Thank you, Phil. During my college and the beginning of graduate school, Phil generously sent me $100 a month. I combined that with food stamps and Social Security and my loans to sustain myself. Those were the good old days. My graduate research included 2 years of ethnographic field research in Sudan, 1983 to 1985, which Phil facilitated greatly. Getting money to the field site 1,000 miles from the capital during a civil war was logistically challenging. I could not get money from my bank account in Sudan. My mail was through USAID and a post office box in Nairobi, Kenya. Each month, Phil sent a $100 bill from our joint account in America through the mail in Kenya and USAID in Sudan. It was a lifeline. While I was in Sudan, Mom and Dad moved to Oregon to be with Dan, Mark, and Jim, and 5 grandchildren. I believe I convinced them in 1983 that they would be welcome. They worried that Jim had moved there to get away from them. I emphasized how much their grandchildren would want them. Photos attest to their welcome in Oregon. Sadly, Dad died a few months before my return from Sudan. Still, it was a joyous occasion to spend Christmas with my mother and brothers in 1985. Similar convergences happened in the late 1980s at Dorothea's Eugene house. Phil provided the piano accompaniment for Mom's elaborate Christmas ritual, and her house was full of progeny. In 1990, Phil had a long visit with my in-laws in Alaska. We had a boat tour from Seward. We celebrated 4th of July with Wendy's uncle, who was retired but had been in Alaska's first Attorney General. We visited my mother-in-law's cabin on Big Lake, and Wendy's uncle's picture postcard cabin in Halibut Cove. Later, Phil hosted Wendy's mother, Maxine, and Wendy's sister, Lolly, to his coast house in Waldpart in 1991. As it eventually turned out, Phil died 16 days before Maxine. My summer and winter visits to Oregon continued in the 1990s, while Phil worked at OSU Corvallis. Phil took care of the arrangements for Mom's funeral in 2003. He acquired her archive of photos and every greeting card she ever received. A year ago, Phil was hospitalized and sensed his impending death. He summoned me for my first post-COVID visit and asked me to care for his professional archive and the family archive with Barbara Ann. That was the last time I saw him ambulatory. I'm still trying to process his absence. Phil showed me what is possible in an academic career. While he had none of his own children, he had plenty of nieces and nephews. Phil maneuvered his career to accommodate his kin by moving to Oregon. Consequently, he had a loving companionship in old age. He was a force in many lives, and now we are bereft.